Well, hi everyone, and welcome to episode 61 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. It is also YouTube channel episode 11. I hope people really go to the YouTube channel. It is fun. There's some visuals that are fun, and you like to see the eye contact with people, and you see if I'm actually paying attention or if they're paying attention. I really like that. But today I have a guest that, not only did we have great conversation after I was looking for a guest, the other thing that, like, she's an author, I'm an author. She's a Reiki practitioner, I'm a Reiki practitioner. I have a big love for psychoanalytic work, and we're going to go into that closer. And she's into that, and it was just, a pleasure to kind of like go, all right, this is going to be a great interview.
Mm.
So no pressure whatsoever. But Catherine DeMonte, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
So is this like your first podcast? Am I getting an exclusive here?
Nope, that's
Oh,
not my first.
damn. All right. Well,
Hmm.
that's okay.
But it's my favorite, even though we haven't done it yet.
And now you're my favorite too. Well, one of the things that because I read your stuff and not everyone may know about you, the first thing I like to know is a little more about yourself. And if you want to share a little bit with people who are listening, a little bit about you.
Oh, sure, sure. Thank you. Well, as you said, I'm a psychotherapist. I've been one for, I think, 31 years, something like that, in Southern California. And I do Reiki. In addition, I'm also pretty psychic. I'm a twin. Um,
You're a twin.
yeah, yeah, which informed a lot of the book in a way, that came out of my work and my childhood, um, and the abundance circle I created. All of being a twin was, I think, informed a lot of how I was treated, the story I told myself. So I'm really big on messages we perceive we're getting as we grow up and how that dictates how we feel about ourselves and choices we make and things like that. And as you said, I wrote a book. It's called Beep Beep, Get Out of My Way, 7 Tools for Powerful Creation and Living Your Unstoppable Life. And it's a book on manifestation and attraction.
Oh, I can't wait to talk about your book. There's so many
Thank
things you
you.
just said. Knowing that you're a twin,
Mm.
there's a certain bond with a twin that most people like, oh, you can describe it. I don't think you can personally. Is
Mm.
that been your experience with your twin or?
Being a twin was amazing. It was like having a built-in best friend all my life. I especially enjoyed it when we were going from, say, elementary school to junior high school, and then from junior high school to high school, because I knew I had somebody there with me, and we call each other our womb mates.
And no fights
We were,
whatsoever,
oh,
obviously.
never. We actually didn't fight that much, and still don't. We're pretty close, and we have an older sister as well. So,
What's funny is I had twins on my soccer team last year, and it went so well they gave me a second set of twins last season. And it's
oh,
fascinating to
really? That's
watch.
odd.
Very odd, but I don't know what they're putting in the water out
Mm-hmm.
there. But um, it was just fascinating even for me because the therapist slash researcher in psychology is like, let's look at this.
Mm. I bet. I can imagine. I can see you on the field doing this.
Yeah, well,
Mm.
as and again, maybe you can go to a YouTube channel, my kids and my people, the parents on the sideline and the kids I coach, they say I have some my pose most of the games and practices are the arms crossed in the back like this.
Uh,
And
uh,
but in my
you're
head, I'm
that coach.
analyzing everything.
I bet. I bet you are. Personalities and styles,
Yeah, it sometimes comes in handy to have a psychology degree to kind of like figure
doesn't
out
it?
what to do.
Yeah, doesn't it? Comes in handy. Do you ever find you go to a new event, new to you event, like a gathering, and you don't know people, and when they find out what you're doing, do they ask you if you're psychoanalyzing them? I sometimes get that.
Oh, I get that all the time.
Do you? Isn't that an interesting question?
And ultimately, what do you answer? Because I'm curious, because I have my answer, but I want to hear what you
Mm.
say.
That's a good question. I probably should say, why do you ask like a therapist and tell me if what's
We're
behind
all
that
going to pull
question.
up our sheets like this.
But I don't do that. But I just kind of smile and say, I'm not. You're,
Wow.
I'm not analyzing you. I'm just here as a, you know, as a party goer.
I've come to a point in my life that when someone asks me that I don't know at a party or something, and say, "Oh, you're analyzing me," and like, "Are you going to pay me?"
Like that.
And then they're like, people are like, "No," and I'm like, "Then the answer is no. I don't have time for that. I'm off the clock here." Uh,
I like that. I'm gonna borrow that if I may.
oh, please go ahead. I mean, it's even funnier if you're dating, and I don't know if you've ever been on the apps and dating, and you're a therapist.
Mm-mm.
Oh,
No,
so
thank
when
goodness.
one of the things
I
that I had to do in one of my profiles, and someone, I'm currently seeing was going well with, thankfully, she's like, what
Oh,
struck me
good.
about your profile? She's like, you wrote, "I'm a therapist, but I'm not your therapist." And we still laugh about it
Mm.
today.
I like that. I like that. You
So
will not be psychoanalyzed on our date. Trust me.
I don't
Trust me,
have
I'm a
time for
doctor.
that.
Mm-mm. No.
Well, it's interesting because you go into psychology, and I don't know where did you get your degrees?
Down south in Southern California.
Like
About,
USC or?
no, Cal State Northridge is where I got my degrees, which is a suburb of LA.
Oh, I know exactly where that is
You
actually.
do?
Yeah, well,
Oh,
I watch basketball. Um,
ah, gotcha.
but so, we go to school for college, and we're going to be therapists, psychotherapists, whatever we're called this week. Um, but we have a journey there, and I always kind of remind people that therapists. I didn't go like when I was doing like my degree, my therapy. I was going to be doing therapy not only in French, but I was going to do it
Mm.
in Montreal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well,
Wow.
my journey brought me to a different place. How about
Mm.
you tell me more
Mm-hmm.
about the journey of how you got to where you're at today?
Okay. I was originally a something called a communicative disorders major, which had speech pathology, audiology, and I don't remember the third, speech pathology, audiology, and working with the deaf. And I really liked it, but that got me interested in working with the deaf as a therapist. And I thought I would either work with deaf clients because at that time I was fluent in sign language, and you have to take classes in deaf culture and things like that. And I don't know how I got interested in it because I don't have family members that are deaf or anything, but I just was interested. So I came to Cal State Northridge to get my psych degree, my psych master's after a deaf studies major there. The reason I moved there was because they had this deaf studies program, and that was the only one in the nation, except for Gallaudet College in Washington, which is school for the deaf, as you know.
I was
But
going to ask you about that, but go ahead.
uh-huh. But I went to Cal State Northridge for that degree and thought I would graduate and then work with the deaf. But I started taking classes in psychology in the master's program and loved that so much, and kind of let go of the deaf studies part of it because I fell in love with the program and the idea of, as you said, the different schools of psychology like psychoanalytic. I didn't know much about, but when I learned about Jung's theories and things, I just was so enthralled. And family systems. It was all the stuff I was interested in as a girl. Like even in high school, I just found people and the study of people and why we think like we do, or you know, just what makes us the people we are. I just found that fascinating in high school. They were also the people I admired most as a girl were all therapists. They were kind to us. They were thoughtful. They were good conversationalists. And I didn't know a lot of adults that were like that, that weren't therapists. All my favorite people were therapists. And that's how I became one.
There's so many questions that come with that. But the first thing is I did learn ASL. We had
Oh.
programs. It's 15 years old. Don't ask me to
Mm.
do it. I know the basic. They know how are you and all that. That's about it.
Uh-huh. Mm.
But I think that when you said that, you said, I don't know why. I think that learning another language is so fascinating, and learning
Mm,
ASL is learning another language. I don't know
it
if that's
is.
what struck you, but
Yeah, that was part of it for sure. Yeah.
so
And I
that's what,
like you reminding people that ASL, American Sign Language, is a language. A lot of people don't realize that. When I was in school, it didn't count as a foreign language for a while. It does now, but when other foreign languages were offered, it wasn't one of them, even though it was a school that specialized in deaf studies and had many deaf students. But like I said, they do now.
no, and I think that that's why when you said that, I think that, having another language, and yes, that was purposeful to say it out loud so people who are listening know that it is its own language,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
there is many different types of sign language across the world.
Hmm. That's a question people ask a lot too, isn't it? Does American Sign Language work in other countries? But we know that not everybody speaks English, they have their own language. And when you think about how long ago people were learning, it was way before we had planes going back and forth between countries. So yes, they all have their own sign language, just like they have their own spoken language.
Canadian Sign Language looks very similar to ASL, but has their own little values. And then Quebec Sign Language is also there's a lot of stuff that you can say is similar, but is a little different also from
Mm,
Canadian Sign Language and American Sign Language.
mm-hmm.
So,
Interesting.
and I can't speak intelligently of any other sign language. I just know those three.
Oh, well, good for you. That's three more than most people.
So,
Yeah, that's
but no,
awesome.
but so you go in, you become, you do all the studies, and you're like, oh, psychoanalytic, learn about Jung.
Mm.
So, do you just go and get a couch and say, lie down, I'm going to be at the head, and you're going to talk about your shadow, or how does that work?
Actually, shadow came up so much later in my work. Um, I mostly identified, I would say, as a family systems therapist. I was really interested in people's backgrounds and their child, their order in terms of birth, things like that. That was the orientation I used to get my license. When you have to use a certain model, that was what I used, was Bowen's family systems.
I was going to say that's a very, very common one, but
Uh-huh.
I got into Young actually with the masks, not shadow, and then I got into the shadows.
Ah,
Uh, uh,
gotcha.
but you talked about, the kindest people you met were therapists. How do we meet when we're younger, like in our, I say, like, teenage years and young adult? Do you just go around like, hey, are you a therapist? I'd like to talk to you. You seem nice. I mean, how does that work to meet so many therapists that are so nice?
The ones I met all went to the church that we went to as a family when we were growing up in Central
Okay.
California. They were sort of involved with it, like they would do workshops and sometimes do a sermon, but like theirs were really interesting too. They weren't, and the church wasn't a dogmatic or strict church or anything. So it was um, and when these people would speak, they might speak on the life of St. Francis or something, and they would be a meditation teacher and a psychologist or something. I just like their energy. They were good people who seemed very non-judgmental and kind and warm, and they all seemed very bright to me and were. One was a doctor and when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of female doctors, and psychologists. And I remember being impressed by her. She was older and really kind, and then there were a couple of men I liked a lot too.
Yeah, well, that's, it's nice to have someone you can look up to, especially if you're a
Yeah.
woman and you have a female, very successful female. I'm a big fan. I mean, when you talked about schooling, all I can think of is I had done feminist study and through psychology, and that was my,
Mm.
multicultural thing. And I thought that was very thoughtful because it's also minorities, because women were, and they told me, yeah, that's not enough. You got to do something else. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh yeah, because women are not repressed at all in this country, but that's
Right.
okay. You're right. I'm just gonna go do something else. So I was thinking about
Good
that
for
when you
you.
said that. But no, it's always good to have, like, I have two daughters now, so I've become
Mm.
even a stronger feminist in my
Oh,
life.
good, good. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. And I think girls need to see that in their fathers. they'll also very likely pick a man, if they pick a man or pick a partner that's a feminist, I would think, because their dad was.
And I think that that's what, you gotta model that behavior for your kids, but, I've been a feminist. My mom broke the glass ceiling before the glass ceiling occurred, so,
Mm,
I always give her a lot
good.
of credit for my belief
Oh,
systems around that because she was high
mm,
up in AT the equivalent to AT&T Canada, and
wow.
and human resources, and so I always give my mom a lot of credit for the feminist side that I have, so
Good, good. Yeah, and that's a nice thing for her to hear, I would think. So I would imagine that it felt good to be that as her, and then to just know that her son is watching and absorbing that. Awesome.
I'm gonna send her this episode right away, and that way you're like, "See, I'm a good son." Uh, but the reason why I was also asking when met all these therapists, I always like this is a standard question for all my guests is, "Have you ever been in therapy?" That's why I was kinda, like, wondering.
Ah, yes. And the answer is yes. I so believe in therapy. I think it's so important to look at our stuff, look at our thinking, look at how we got to where we are, look at our unconscious material. I've been in therapy for, I'm not currently in, but I wonder how many years it's been. I don't know, like 8 or 9, something like that.
Good
Lots of
for you.
workshops on top. Oh, thank you. And that might even be less than it really is. I was
Oh,
in
so
quite
you're
a while.
cured, is that what you're telling me?
I'm all cured. Yep, I got it all figured out. I'm
Okay,
I'm really proud of myself.
for those of you listening, there's no such thing as curing our mental health, just for the
That's
record.
right. We were just kidding.
It's a
Yeah.
tongue-in-cheek joke. We never when people ask, I joke around when I terminate with my clients, "You're cured," and they all laugh like that, and I'm like, "You're not cured, but you're doing really well, so congratulations."
Mm,
But just
mm,
to kill a little bit of that myth of curing mental health.
yeah. Yeah, and hopefully we never think that about ourselves, that we're always striving to be better and to grow and to look a little deeper, look a little at it from a different angle. I think it's so vital. I mean, I think that's what we're doing here, isn't it? To always be growing and stretching and learning, evolving.
Right, and I think that's the stuff that, you learn through therapy, and for me, and is also kind of the conversations I have with my clients sometimes is that I knew everything when I was 18. Now that I'm 47, what I know fits in a thimble. It's about this big.
Oh, wow.
It does,
Well, good.
I don't know anything anymore. And I
Mhm,
think that's a great evolution. I'm still in therapy,
mhm,
but I still think that that's part of, some people can do that journey of their mental health on their own. And if they hit
mhm,
a problem or, one of my favorite colleagues talks about how you can't solve a problem that the same mind created. So if you get
mm,
stuck,
yeah,
you need to be maybe having a third party just to help you out. And it doesn't need to be like intense 12-week psychotherapy. Could be
mhm,
like you see him maybe 4 or 5 times, you feel better and things are better and
mhm,
you always have to keep that in mind. But I think we should all be in mental health therapy at least a few times in our lives just to kind of like
mhm,
even us out.
mhm, I do too. Oh, I like the way you said that. Yes, absolutely, to even us out.
Yeah. Because
Absolutely.
I
Mhm,
never want to be so egotistical that I'm full of myself up here. And I don't want to be so low that, I want to
mm,
do things that hurt myself or do stuff like that.
sure.
So it's finding that balance of like, okay, maybe now I need a little check because I'm too low, or if I'm too high, maybe I need a little bit of a, you know, smackdown, so to speak. So,
Mhm, mhm, reality check or something. Yeah,
and sometimes
yeah.
people are able to do it on their own, which is absolutely awesome. I respect that. But
Mhm.
I know for me, it probably means lifetime therapy.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not adverse to going back at all.
I
It was
know.
just kind of a break, but yeah, I even contemplated it recently. I thought maybe I would go, and I called somebody, and the time didn't work out just for the with one I wanted to meet with, and so I didn't. But I was very, very open to the idea for sure.
And
I
thank
think
you for,
it's.
go
Mhm.
ahead.
Oh no, that's okay. Thank you.
I was going
I'm
to say, you broke that wall. I appreciate that because I want the audience to hear that, hey, I called someone, didn't work out. That doesn't mean I won't go back ever again. And it's okay to go and back to
Mhm.
therapy. I think
Mhm.
thank you for saying that. I appreciate that more than
Oh.
you know.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. Yeah. Yeah, I think different stages bring up different things, or just something, a situation comes up. That's what it was for me. And I wanted somebody to look at it. It just was timing. And I think I really liked her too. So I have her in my pocket as somebody I would see
And that's always good to have too. I mean, it,
Mhm.
you know, the other part I always talk about in these podcasts is it's not having a therapist that looks good on paper, it's making sure you mesh with them.
Uh-huh,
Because it's not,
absolutely.
with all due respect to Mr. Young or
Mhm,
to Mr. Adler or Mr. whoever,
mhm.
it's the therapeutic relationship that really is the strength, not, yeah. Does it
Yeah.
help it to have certain things that you know a lot about? I'm a CBT type guy. Yeah, it
Mm.
helps.
Mhm,
But CBT is not worth anything if I don't connect with my client and vice versa.
mhm, absolutely, that's so vital, isn't it?
So I,
Yeah, it's really, really vital we really have to mesh with each other.
and that's
Mhm.
why I wanted to mention it, because something that sometimes people, like you say, oh, you repeat that all the time. I'm like, one day everyone's going to get it. Then I can
Mm.
stop repeating
Good response.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, speaking of Mr. Young,
Mhm,
you know, um, I would love to hear more about, I, again, obviously, shadow work something I really, really appreciate. What brought me to shadow work was actually Debbie Ford's The Dark Side of Light Chasers.
mm,
Rest in peace, Debbie.
yeah,
I know it's been several years, but I really
yeah.
love that book. It was given to me by my internship supervisor who knew me before, and
Oh,
she gave me that book and I loved it.
oh, I can see why you did.
So,
Mhm.
but and I wanted to shout out, like, maybe Young's a little heavy for some people, so the lighter, more palpable version is the Debbie Ford Dark Side of Light
Mhm,
Chasers.
mhm.
But maybe you need, instead of people reading a book, how about we talk about maybe the shadow work and what
Sh
does that mean? Because
Mhm.
I don't think that people understand a lot about that.
I don't either. I don't think a lot of people know about shadow, and it's a shame because when you know about shadow work, your life changes. And I think just to give a definition of it, since people don't know what often don't know what it is, that it's not called shadow because it's dark and nefarious and scary. It's shadow because it's under the light of and in a way out of our awareness, out of the light,
Right.
out of the way of the light. We're just unaware of it, but even though we're not aware of it, it dictates our life. It creates problems in our life when we come from it. It will have us picking things and calling things into our life that aren't healthy, behaving in ways we'll later be embarrassed about. So it's really, really vital to know what it is. And the best way to know, or the easiest way to know what's in our shadow, I believe, is what bothers you and other people. Like when
What
you
bothers you? That's a good one. What do you
mm.
mean by that? I love it, by the way. I'm just saying, what does that mean?
Good. What it means is like when you were young, probably, and heard from a teacher that when you point your finger at a kid and call them a name, that you have three pointing back at you, or kids on the playground would say that too. And that's what our shadow is. We might not like everything, but when we're really triggered and bothered, it's because that trait is in our shadow, and it will have us behaving in ways that seem bigger than that incident should have warranted. It's Jung called it the person would rather not be, which I also like. I like that a lot. That that's what our shadow is. It's one another way to define it.
Carl was a very smart man.
Mhm, right?
Um,
Yeah.
you know, I'm a concrete example guy. I have my own idea,
Mhm.
but I'd like you to maybe give me an example of what we point out in other people that we don't like, and it really is kind of like our shadow.
Mhm.
Can-
We could say there's, like any word we use that describes them, like a person like they're so self-righteous, they're so bossy, um, they're such a know-it-all. Um,
but I'm not self-righteous. What are you talking about?
so that's interesting. Then, if people when people do that, it's because on some level, I think they're working so hard not to be that, but that's what they project. So let's say, for example, what we don't like in somebody is that they're bossy. It may be that we were called that as a little girl or little boy, told not to be so bossy when we were playing. We might not even know exactly what that meant, but we knew that the grown-ups in our life, our parents, whose it feels like our life depends on them loving us and that are being accepted by them, or they can cast us out, is what the primal belief is. So I want them to really like me and approve of me. So I won't be bossy, and we push bossy underground, and that is now in our shadow. So it's the traits we push underground because we've deemed them unacceptable. But we're not born, we don't come into the world with judgment. We're pure little innocent beings that are loving and accepting and feel good about ourselves. And then we get shamed or labeled, um, and or spoken to in a certain way, and that becomes like, if I don't want to, if we have the feeling I don't want to be that, then that goes underground. So if it's bossy, just to use that same, to follow that same thread, we will, the way shadow works is that if we have something in our shadow, we will try really hard not to be that thing. But the beautiful thing about shadow is that if we were to bring it to the light and use the positive side of it, it actually can become our greatest strength. So the positive side of bossy might be something like a good leader, for
Right.
example. But if we don't acknowledge that, we might not show up in a way as a leader that where we could have affected positive change, or we might not use our voice much when we have a lot of the thing to say, or that could even be personally, we don't use our voice much, like saying no when we mean it, for example, because I don't want to look mean or I don't want to be bossy,
Right.
you know.
I think that there's two examples that I use regularly about the shadow. I tell
Mm.
people that, I always say, what do you think I do as a living? Is it selfless or selfish?
Mm.
And most people go selfless because, therapy and giving and all that. I said, you're right. But if I didn't get paid, I don't know if I would be that enthusiastic about it.
Hmm.
And people are like, well, that means you're selfish. And I'm like, yeah, because that was the one that Debbie's book is brilliant because it tells you look in the mirror and say all these things. And when I had to
Mm.
say selfish in front of the mirror, I couldn't look at myself. It was hard.
Oh.
No, I'm not. I didn't grow up that way. I'm a giving guy. I'm doing therapy. And I
Hmm.
realized, like, yeah, we are selfish.
Hmm.
And instead of running compulsively from one end of selfless to selfish, when you kind of acknowledge the shadow, you can actually have access to both.
Yes, that's so well said. You can have access to both. You can have the positive and the supposed negative, right? Or
So,
both qualities, like, to use your analogy, what's wrong with being selfish? Because that might mean we have good boundaries, or we take time out for ourselves, to give ourselves good self-care.
right.
There are positive sides to these attributes.
And I think that that's what I kind of remind myself. And, part of that idea comes a little bit from an old iTunes Alanis Morissette had done an iTunes remix, whatever the hell it's called. And she had given an example, a different one, but I always thought that was good to kind of like use an analogy where you can access the both. And I tell,
Mm.
like people who tell me that you're not a racist or I'm not a racist. And I'm like, I'm a racist. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, because I have prejudice about races, maybe races I've never heard of that
Mm-hmm.
I will try to fit in the box because that's what's easy and convenient for me. I'm
Mm-hmm.
willing to challenge that box and I'm
Mm-hmm.
willing to say that I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But if you acknowledge that you have, these boxes and people accept box a lot better than racist.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not racist, but I'm also racist because I don't know every race in the world. And I don't know everyone's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, people are like, oh, I never thought of it that way. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
don't tell a Guatemalan they're Honduran. I mean,
Oh,
that's
uh-huh.
don't
Uh-huh.
ever do that.
Right.
It's never gonna work out
Right.
well for you. I'm
Right.
I'm a Quebecer, and I don't mind if you call me a Canadian, but as a proud Quebecer, I'm a Quebecer before I'm a Canadian.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
And
Yeah.
so when people are like, oh, well, you speak English? No, we speak French. That's the primary language. There's a history that goes behind that. I'm not going to go
Mm-hmm.
into my diatribe about Quebec here.
Mm.
But at the end of the
That's a
day,
good point.
it's realizing that it's okay not to know everything and have some, people are a lot more accepting of sexism. I'm like, oh, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sexist. Okay, yeah, okay, that's acceptable. Racism is a little hard, and I know it's a controversial statement, But I'm more than happy to say that I'm a racist, not because I'm not working on changing that, but
Mm-hmm.
rather than me compulsively having this, no, 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 I'm not a racist. I don't know if that
Mm-hmm.
helps or not, or if I sound terribly
No,
off.
it very much helps, because if we don't identify what we are and own the truth about it, own the parts that we aren't proud of, so that we can look at them and change them, that's positive and growthful. It's when we pretend we're not something and we are, and then we'll come from that place all the time and embarrass ourselves, because it shows, our shadow shows. Like when you are, somebody will say, you've got spinach in your teeth. We're so grateful to know, right? Like, thank you. I've been walking around with that. That's embarrassing. I'm so glad I know it.
Right.
Well, it's so good to know what our shadow is too, because we're walking around with our the proverbial spinach in our teeth, and smiling and not.
Now you go on YouTube. That was funny. I looked at myself in the camera like, maybe I do have some.
Did she just grab that because I have spinach in my?
But yeah,
Yeah, it's
I
important to
think,
know.
and I think that's why the shadow work is so important, because a lot of the qualities that we don't like about other people are qualities we don't accept in ourselves.
Exactly. That's why it bothers us that they're putting it in our face. I worked hard to hide that stuff, that trait. Why are you showing it to me?
I claim to be a feminist, and I truly am, but I don't know what it is to be a woman, and I don't know
Mm,
everything about being a woman, nor will I ever pretend I don't. So I'll keep on
mhm,
saying I'm not really a good feminist because I want to learn. And I
mm,
tell people it's not a bad thing to admit maybe your faults or your shadow, because
mhm,
it gives you access to so much more. And I don't know if that's how you perceive
mhm.
it, but
I do, absolutely. I absolutely perceive it that way. How are we going to change it if we don't see it? It really needs to be pulled out and examined, doesn't it?
and I think that's the hard part. And I'm not a Jungian by any stretch of the imagination, but I like a lot of young Carl Jung is probably my favorite psychoanalytic
Hmm.
treater, and I use that regularly in therapy. And I tell people like I'm CBT mostly, but
Hmm.
I'll go down any bag of tricks in order to help people.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's so good to know from different, do know from different orientations and theoretical positions and things, I think, to know. Yeah.
I go back to what you talked about, internal family systems.
Hmm.
And until about, I want to say, I'll say 5 to 7 years ago, I can't remember exactly, but everyone talked about that. I'm like, no, why would you do that? And the reason why is that I couldn't remember it.
Oh, is that right?
So therefore it
Oh,
was
interesting.
useless. I didn't remember
Yeah,
it, but
right,
that was my
right.
shadow being fearful that something else could help.
Oh, uh-huh. Right,
And so
right.
I think it's not only looking at the characteristics of individuals. I also tell people like sometimes what we're averse to is probably something that is something we need to look at.
I agree. I agree. I think I would wonder why we're so adverse to it. That's a strong emotion, isn't it? Or strong reaction. And what we would only have a strong reaction if it's bringing up something, in my opinion. You know,
I wish our political parties would understand that nowadays.
I do too. I think there'd be a lot more empathy and compassion, understanding.
Well, we
Uh,
don't, and we need to talk to them about shadows. So we'll set up
mhm.
a Senate hearing.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah.
I'm a new citizen, so it'll work out.
Hmm. Shadow is actually one of the tools in my book, and I put it in. It's a book on attraction, and I don't really see it in attraction. It may be in other books on law of attraction, but I haven't seen it. But I think it's important to know what's in our shadow for a lot of reasons, including the fact that if we're trying really hard to change our life and pull something in, like a partner, but we keep attracting the same type and don't know why, or we can only make so much money and we don't know why we can't get past that. We just get our stumped a lot, or we're repeating patterns, or we get triggered a lot in life. We can't call in what we want if it bumps into our shadow. So if we know what our shadow is, then that can shift. But if we don't, all the I am statements in the world and all the visualization and um, you saying things in the positive and acting like it's here, all those things at work, if we also know what's in our shadow and can call in things. But if we don't, we could start calling something in and then have it bump into shadow, like I don't deserve love, or no one will ever hire me, or whatever our shadow stuff is. And then we don't get what we want, and then really feel like a loser. Like I tried everything that all the books told me will work for attracting something, and it was almost here. And again, it didn't work for me. I guess I am a loser. So it's just so vital. And I really appreciate that readers have told me that my description of it was so simple, so like I took something they said that they felt was really difficult and hard to grasp and put it into pretty, easy to understand language. And that's a high compliment.
And I think that you talked about your book, and I want to hear more about it. And it's called Beep Beep, Get Out of My Way. And there's a companion journal, from what I understand, too.
Yes, there is.
Um,
Yeah.
so maybe to shift gears a little bit, because in the sense that I see the neurological value in what you say, because if I say I'm going to be rich, but I have a blockage neurologically that I don't deserve this, and it's in my
Hmm.
midbrain, which is usually where it's stuck,
Hmm.
it's going to keep me brain. I can't have the law access to the law of attraction. I can't have a lot of that
Hmm.
stuff. But
Hmm.
I think that what I would say to you is that, you talked about the law of attraction in your book, and then you
Hmm.
talked about the shadow.
Hmm.
Th-
Yeah.
I mean, it's just interesting stuff that you kind of melted together. Is there other stuff that you feel like all relates to all that?
To those two, or to the
Anything in
tills.
your book? I'd like to hear more
Mm.
about your book, essentially.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. The book came about because I noticed that people come to therapy, and I'm sure you noticed this too, that they come because something that feels really important to them is missing in their life.
Hmm.
They can't find a partner, and they are lonely, or they're stuck in their work, or want work, um, or have poor self-esteem, whatever it is, that like that thing changed. That I always call that, or I started calling it, the one big thing. Like that's the thing that's missing. So I noticed that when people came in for that, and it was literally every client, I used sort of the same tools for them. Like, be sure you watch your thoughts, really be mindful that like what you put after the word, the two words I am, and be very mindful of what comes after that. I don't even want you joking. I don't want you to say when you forget something like, oh, I'm so stupid, I can't believe I forgot that. I want you to be really like, talk to yourself like you would somebody else. When I am is one of the tools in the book as well. um, I'd like you to become better at receiving when things do come your way. I know that you want to receive partnership, or you want to receive a job, but we're really poor at receiving. So I'd like you to work, learn to work that muscle as well, your receiving muscle, so that if people give you a compliment, I'd like you to just say thank you graciously. That's all. I don't want you to say, "Oh, this whole thing," or if they give you a compliment on what you're wearing or on your haircut, to say, "Really? Oh, I was just going to cut it." We even make faces that now distract from our beauty and and our grace, because we're putting ourselves down in front of them. It's so ironic.
I'm still covering my hand in case I have spinach in my teeth.
I promise you don't. So I noticed there were certain things that I shared, and I worked with, a little bit with shadow back then. I work with it more now. Um, but then I realized, since there were several things that worked a lot, made a powerful difference in lives, it might be nice to have a group, and I called them abundance circles.
Right.
It wasn't just for finance, but whatever you wanted more of. I would teach
Can you tell
the
me more what you mean by that? Because I think that people don't necessarily understand abundance. Abundance, they think it's the, what was it, 1.2 billion in July of Mega Millions or whatever
Oh,
lottery.
wow.
People
Mm.
think about abundance as such.
Oh, uh-huh. Yeah.
So tell me more about abundance. It might be helpful just to give a audience a little bit of that definition.
To me, that means more than I really need. There's plenty of it, so I have plenty of love and more. I have plenty of, my financial needs are all met, and I even have extra for the fun things, not just the basics. Um, More joy, more compassion, more travel, the things that light us up. I notice I didn't do it on purpose, but as I talk about it, I even feel more lit up, and I'm doing this like a lot. Like there's a lot of something, plenty
Right.
of food in our pantry. There's plenty. That's how I'm defining abundance. It's,
Yeah, because I think it was good. It was important to think abundance as not only financial, but abundance comes from different things. I mean,
mm-hmm,
and I think that that's why I wanted to kind of like get your definition because I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think that
mm,
people really misconstrue abundance because, you know, we have abundance right now in this interview because
mm,
you're giving, I'm giving. There's an abundance of love for each other and not the way people sometimes think about love, but it's just like
mm-hmm.
you, if you reciprocate,
Connection.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, nice. Thank you. And I'm glad you asked the question because I had a little bit of hesitancy using that word because maybe this was my shadow stuff, but I thought of coaches
I'm not
who
your therapist.
and you don't even play one on mine on TV.
I just have this little podcast here.
I realized that I had kind of a prejudice against some coaches, not all of them do this, but that really marketed themselves as people who were going to help you make X amount of money. Like that was the only kind of abundance, and to work with them cost a lot of money, a lot of money, and they were going to make you a lot of money, and that to me felt kind of, for one thing, just too much of a straight line into that one thing. And that's not my goal, was not to make a ton of money. um, so it was a turn off. That kind of coaching turned me off. So I kind of hesitated using the word, but only for a minute, because I got pretty strongly that that was the right word. And I also got these tools sort of came channeled to me in order, and now the order makes sense. So when I got that's what they're called, I thought, okay, I'll go with it. That feels right. I
And how
don't.
do I think
Mm,
that's an important point. I stop sorry for
mm,
stopping you here.
that's okay.
It felt right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that when you talk about shadow work, when things feel right, we're like, ah, that's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Our
And
egoic
then no,
mind gets in the way.
so
Hmm.
I'm not your therapist, but I also think that it's important thing to remember is that when things feel like good, why, you know, do you think that, you know, people kind of like fight themselves for any particular reason or?
Yeah. I think our egoic mind gets in the way and says things like, well, what would people think? Or that's silly. Or I can't trust myself. Why would I try, start now? I think all of that noise gets in the way.
Okay.
Even the name of the book came, I knew I didn't know what I was going to call it. I knew I didn't want to say 8 tools that will change your life, like just I didn't want to have just a boring title that didn't tell you. I don't know. I wanted something, I don't know. Whoops, sorry. I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew what I didn't want. And
Gimmick.
um
You call that gimmicky, by the way.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I didn't want anything gimmicky. That perfectly describes it. But one day I was putting something in a dresser drawer, and my 2 dogs kind of got in the way, and I went beep beep, get out of my way. I was writing the book at the time, but was not finished, but didn't know what I'd call it. And I went, wait a minute, that's the title of the book, and I didn't know why. And then I thought, oh, I know why, because first it kind of came to me, and I thought that's the title, and then when I reflected on it later, I thought, well, that fits perfectly, because when these people kind of graduate from the 8 sessions of the circles, um, there were 8 sessions, but 7 tools, but Shadow met for two sessions. When they were done, they were on fire. There was no stopping them. Like I remember one woman who came in because she kept meeting men, and that's what she wanted to attract, but she wasn't even dating, let alone she would date, but just for a bit, or she wasn't even being asked out. And there was no reason she shouldn't have been. She was fun, and she was 30, and already had her own house and making good money. She was beautiful and successful, and just she had it all going on. There was no reason she shouldn't be dating. Um, but she had been married once before, very briefly. It
Okay.
was so brief that I didn't know about that marriage for a long time when she was my client. But when she was in the abundance circle, that came up again, that she'd been married briefly. And she said, and he was so controlling. And she made that face. She went, but he was so controlling. And and then she got off of it and kept talking about wanting to attract a partner. I said, I need to stop you for a second. I noticed that when you said marriage and you brought up your ex, you made a face and went kind of a face. It looks like you don't want that again. She said, no, I never want that again. And I said, oh, that's interesting, because what you want to attract, though, is another partner. She
Right.
actually wanted to attract marriage ultimately. And I said, but if you think marriage is that and you're trying to attract it, I'm wondering if they're bumping into each other. You want it, but you don't, based on your history. So I wonder if you might want to either change what you want to attract. Maybe it isn't marriage, maybe it's a live in partner, or you could attract marriage, but to change your definition of it. That I will have a something that's not controlling, who gives me my space, kind of a partner, and try to attract that.
Mhm.
And that flipped everything for her. And after she flipped it, she came in and she talked about meeting several people in the 2 weeks between, several people. And I laughed and said, "It's raining men for you, my God." And that's what made me think of people being lit up. Like it's like beep beep, they're on fire. Get out of their way.
And I like the title of the book.
Oh, thank you.
What led to, and I don't know if the book came first or the group came first or the ideas came first, but what led, like some people would say, well, no, that's like a lot more individual work. That's not a group work. What would you say
Mm-hmm.
to that? And
Mm.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm just trying to feed you the line.
Gotcha. Well, many of them were, not all of them, but many were already in therapy with me. So they were doing their work. And some, like I said, were not. But that became group work because we worked on the tools, but people's individual stuff came up. It wasn't group therapy per se, but uh, talking as a group about the tools would bring up stuff like it did with her, and we'd process it some, but it wasn't necessarily really deep work. It was more about using these tools, learning about them, applying them, coming back and talking about them again the next week. How did you do with the IMs this, after last week when that was the tool? And how are you doing with learning the importance of receiving? How'd you do this past week?
So
So that
the
was a setup.
it's been something that I've been trying to get through on my podcast and with other people. There's certainly value of having peer support.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel it's contributed to beep beep, get out of your way, and having those, 8 sessions, 7 tools to get people to the other side?
It was phenomenal. I tracked the numbers, and it was about 9 out of 10 people who literally got the thing that they came in to get, which I thought was pretty amazing. And I had many, many circles. I still have them, but I mean, pretty high because group, when you, not only are the tools powerful, but when you speak what you want out loud to supportive, loving people who are holding it with you, there's something about speaking something out loud to the universe that I think is very different because you feel kind of seen and
Right.
also accountable. That's very different than writing it in your journal at night where nobody can see it. And then the other people held it up for you. And then we got back and talked about that tool and then started a new tool. It was very, very powerful, that combination.
It might be like the thought that I had, and again, this is my own meandering thought. I don't know this for a fact, but I wonder if it is also an amazing tool to have the peer support when you're doing the shadow work.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's very, very helpful. It was done when we did shadow work. We spoke about it in general terms, of course, at first, and then we shared what we thought our own was by doing that exercise of, you can either ask, who bothers you, like name a person that bothers you and you write that down, then you say why they bother you, and then you realize you have that trait, and then people say, I don't have anything like so and so. Well, I guess I do in my shadow. But then when we would turn it into its positive opposite, people felt really held and loved and supported. Like let's say it's selfish, and what would be the positive of being selfish? And when they've got permission to take time out for themselves or say no when they wanted to, instead of always saying yes, or setting proper boundaries, they felt so supported, you
I
know.
bet,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
I just realized that we've been almost an hour already.
Oh wow. I didn't realize that.
No,
Flew.
this is all good. I always, breaking a wall here for the audience. If I ever get to a point where I'm like 30 minutes in going, it's only been fucking 30 minutes, that's a problem. I'm like, I looked at the time like, Oh, geez. And people think that it's kind of like it's because it happens. I have great guests like you,
Mm.
and people like, oh, it's kind of like they think it's a put on. I'm like, no, seriously, I do not see the time go by. It,
Mm.
this is
Mhm.
why, like, part of me really wants people to be able to go to the YouTube channel as well as the podcast in order to see that, I'm not looking at a clock. I'm really talking to a person. So
Mhm.
I really, really appreciate everything you said. I'd
Mm.
like to hear more about how I can go get your book and
Mm.
your journal and anything else that you would need to contact you because truly I really enjoyed our conversation. It went by so fast.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed it too, and thank you again for having me. People can find the book either on my website, which is my name. It's www.catherinedemonte.com. And there is a book link. There's also a link to the Abundance Circles, and to my psychotherapy work. So anything they want to know about me is on that website. I'm also on Amazon and a couple of other bookseller sites. And yeah, and the journal and the book are both there. You can either look it up by the title
Okay.
or my name, Catherine DeMonte.
And I can tell you from experience that it is absolutely easy to get it online. So,
Mm.
um, so very easy to find on Amazon. Do you have any social media that you kind of like do or?
I do. I'm on Facebook and on Instagram. I'm tending to go Instagram a little more lately because of the Facebook stuff that is not as clean at times.
Right. That's my
I
experience.
mhm.
And is it is
Yeah,
just Catherine DeMonte?
yes, it is. I don't have another name on there.
I'm
Just the yeah,
I just want to
that's my
make
name.
sure that people can go and reach you any way they can.
I
This will all
appreciate
be
that. Yeah.
it will be in the show notes. Um, but from the bottom of my heart, Catherine, this has been a great
Mm.
interview. Really love talking
Oh,
about
thank you,
shadow work
Steve. Thank
and
you.
really honor the work of Mr. Young, but also
Mhm.
honor really the book that turned me on to it, which was Debbie Ford. And I want
It's
people
so
to go,
good.
I hope people go get your book because I know I'm going to order my copy.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
and I hope that we stay in touch.
Me too. I would like that very much. And it was such a pleasure. I
Well,
felt the connection right away,
well,
like
Cat,
within seconds.
well, Catherine, I think that is a huge compliment, and I'll say thank you. Working on my
Oh.
shadow work, uh, and I'll talk to
Good
you
for you,
soon.
Steve. Okay, sounds good. Thanks again. Bye bye.
Bye.